The certified letter from the Pinewood Meadows Homeowners Association arrived on a Tuesday morning in January, and I knew before opening it that my winter was about to get complicated. I'm Ryan Danvers, and I've lived in this cookie-cutter subdivision in Gilbert, Arizona for 3 years. The desert climate here means scorching summers and surprisingly cold winters, and my single-pane windows from the 1990s were bleeding money every time I ran the heater. Last month, my electric bill hit $300, which was insane for a 1,500-square-foot house. So I did what any reasonable person would do. I went to Home Depot, bought some plastic window insulation kits, and spent a Saturday afternoon shrinking the film onto my windows with a hair dryer. The plastic worked great. My heating bill dropped by almost 40% the next month. The house stayed warmer, and I could actually sit near the windows without feeling the cold air seeping through. I was pretty proud of myself, honestly. That satisfaction lasted exactly 2 weeks. Standing in my kitchen with my coffee getting cold, I tore open the HOA letter. The heading read "Notice of Violation" in bold red letters. My jaw clenched as I read through the corporate speak. Dear homeowner, it has come to our attention that unauthorized modifications have been made to the exterior appearance of your property. Specifically, plastic film has been applied to multiple windows facing the street, creating an unsightly wrinkled appearance that violates Section 4.2 of the Pinewood Meadows Community Guidelines regarding exterior aesthetics. You have 14 days to remedy this violation or face daily fines of $50. I read it twice, then a third time. Unauthorized modifications. It was window insulation inside my house. I walked to my front windows and looked at them from the living room. Sure, if you got close, you could see some minor wrinkles in the plastic film, but from the street. I went outside in my slippers and stood on the sidewalk. You could barely tell anything was different unless you really stared. My phone buzzed. It was my neighbor, Marcus Chen, who lived 2 doors down. Did you get a letter? He asked without preamble. About the window plastic. Yeah, just opened it. Same. I put up the same stuff on my north-facing windows last month. Apparently, Susan Kershaw drove by and decided it was her business to police our energy efficiency. Susan Kershaw. Of course. The HOA president and the stereotypical nightmare everyone warns you about when buying a house in an HOA community. She was a woman in her late 50s with a blonde bob haircut that looked like it required a monthly maintenance schedule. She drove a white Lexus SUV with custom plates that read PNWDQN for Pinewood Queen, which told you everything you needed to know about her personality. What are you going to do? I asked Marcus. I'm taking mine down. Not worth the fight. I've got 2 kids and a full-time job. I can't deal with Susan's crusade. After we hung up, I stood in my driveway looking at my house. The January sun was already warming the day, but nights still dropped into the 30s. I thought about my reduced electric bill. I thought about the principle of the thing. And I thought about Susan Kershaw, who lived in a house twice the size of mine and probably didn't think twice about her utility bills. I wasn't taking down the insulation, but I also wasn't going to just ignore the violation notice. That evening, I did something I should have done before installing anything. I actually read through the entire HOA guidelines document. It was 73 pages of dense legalese, but I made myself coffee and went through every section. Section 4.2, which they'd cited, talked about exterior modifications requiring approval. But here was the thing. The plastic film was installed on the interior of the windows. It was technically not an exterior modification at all. I grabbed a highlighter and marked several relevant passages. Section 1.8, defined exterior modifications as any change to the outside surface or structure of the home visible from the street or neighboring properties. Section 2.3 stated that homeowners had full autonomy over interior design choices that do not materially alter the structure or exterior appearance of the dwelling. The plastic film didn't alter anything. It was a temporary, removable solution installed entirely inside my house. The fact that you could see it from outside was no different than them being able to see my curtains or furniture. I felt my strategy forming. If they wanted to play technical games with the HOA rules, I could play too. But I'd also give them a solution that met their aesthetic concerns. The next morning, I called the HOA management company, Desert Communities Management, and asked to be placed on the agenda for the next board meeting. The receptionist, who sounded tired of dealing with homeowner complaints, told me the next meeting was in 9 days and that I had 3 minutes to state my case. 3 minutes. Board policy. Homeowner comments are limited to 3 minutes per person to keep meetings efficient. Efficient for who? Will you be attending or not, sir? I confirmed my attendance and hung up. 9 days gave me time to prepare. I spent my lunch break at work researching window film options. That's when I discovered museum-grade UV protective film. Museums use this stuff to protect valuable artwork from sun damage while maintaining perfect clarity. It's essentially invisible when properly installed, with none of the wrinkles or haziness of the cheap plastic shrink film. It also provides similar insulation properties, though not quite as effective as the dual-layer plastic. But it would work. The catch: museum-grade film was expensive, really expensive. A professional installation for my windows would run about $1,200. The plastic film kits had cost me $48 total, but an idea was forming. If I had to remove the plastic anyway, and if I replaced it with something that was completely invisible from the outside, I'd make my point while technically complying with their aesthetic demands. Plus, the museum-grade film was permanent and would continue saving energy year-round, not just in winter. I called 3 window film installation companies in the Phoenix area. The first 2 couldn't fit me in for 3 weeks. The third, Arizona Solar Solutions, could send someone out for a quote the next day. I took it. The estimator, a guy named Tommy who looked about 25 and wore a company polo shirt, showed up right on time. He examined my windows, measured everything, and nodded when I explained what I wanted. Museum-grade UV film, yeah, we do that. Mostly for commercial clients, art galleries, that kind of thing. Not many residential requests. It's going to be pricey. How pricey? He did some calculations on his tablet. For all the windows you're showing me, about 1,300 installed. That includes the film, professional installation, and a 10-year warranty. This stuff doesn't wrinkle, doesn't bubble, and you can't tell it's there once it's on. It also blocks 99% of UV rays and adds some insulation value, though not as much as the plastic. What's the lead time? If you approve today, we can have a crew out by Friday. It was Wednesday. That would give me 2 days before the board meeting. Perfect. I approved the quote, wincing internally at the cost but feeling justified. This whole situation was ridiculous, and I was going to make a point. I sent the invoice to my email and added it to my HOA Fight folder I'd created. On Thursday, I drafted a 3-minute speech for the board meeting. I timed myself reading it aloud. 3 minutes was not a lot of time. I had to be concise and direct. I practiced until I could deliver it calmly and clearly, without going over the limit. Friday morning, the installation crew from Arizona Solar Solutions arrived at 8 in the morning. There were 2 installers, Tommy and an older guy named Rick. They covered my floors with drop cloths, removed the plastic insulation film I'd installed, and got to work. The process was meticulous. They cleaned each window thoroughly, then carefully applied the museum-grade film using squeegees to work out any bubbles or imperfections. It took them until early afternoon to finish all the windows. When they were done, I walked outside and looked at my house. The difference was astounding. You literally could not tell there was any film on the windows. They looked exactly like regular clean windows. The clarity was perfect. Inside, there was the slightest hint of a coating if you looked at an angle in certain light, but from any normal position, you'd never know it was there. "This is exactly what I needed," I told Tommy as he packed up their equipment. "Yeah, this stuff is great. If your HOA gives you any grief about this, they're crazy. There's nothing to see." "Oh, I'm counting on that." That evening, I took multiple photos of my windows from various angles and distances. I also took close-up shots showing the complete clarity and lack of any visible film. I compiled these into a simple presentation on my laptop. Sunday afternoon, I was in my garage organizing some tools when I heard the distinctive click of high heels on my driveway. I looked up to see Susan Kershaw herself, wearing what looked like country club casual attire, complete with a designer handbag and oversized sunglasses despite it being January. "Mr. Danvers," she said, not even attempting to sound pleasant, "I noticed you removed the plastic from your windows." "Good. I'm glad we could resolve this without further conflict." I set down the wrench I'd been holding and walked out to meet her on the driveway. "Actually, Susan, I didn't remove it because of your violation notice." Her perfectly sculpted eyebrows rose above her sunglasses. "Excuse me." I replaced the plastic insulation with museum-grade UV protective film. It provides similar energy efficiency without any visible appearance issues. "I'll be presenting this at Tuesday's board meeting." Her mouth tightened into a thin line. "Museum film? That sounds expensive." Was that really necessary? Well, your violation notice gave me two options: pay $50 a day in fines or fix the appearance issue. I fixed the appearance issue. The rules are quite clear about modifications. They are, and I'm in complete compliance. The film is invisible from the exterior, which means it doesn't affect the aesthetic uniformity of the neighborhood. That was your concern, right? Aesthetics. Susan pulled off her sunglasses, and I could see the calculation happening behind her eyes. Interior modifications that are visible from the exterior still fall under community guidelines, Mr. Danvers. The board will make the final determination at the meeting. I look forward to it. She replaced her sunglasses and turned on her heel, walking back toward her Lexus, which she'd parked in front of my house. I noticed she'd left it running the whole time, exhaust puffing into the January air. So much for energy conservation. Marcus called me that evening. "Dude, Susan just knocked on my door asking if I'd seen your windows lately." "What did you do?" I explained the museum-grade film situation. Marcus laughed. "That's brilliant. She must be losing her mind." "Are you really going to the board meeting?" "Absolutely. Want to come for moral support?" "I'll be there. This should be entertaining." Tuesday evening arrived with clear skies and a temperature in the mid-60s, perfect Arizona winter weather. The board meeting was held at the Pinewood Meadows Community Center, a beige stucco building that matched every other structure in the neighborhood. I arrived 15 minutes early with my laptop and notes. The community center's main room had about 30 folding chairs set up facing a long table where the board members would sit. A handful of other residents were already there, mostly older folks who probably attended every meeting as their primary social activity. Marcus showed up right after me along with his wife Jennifer. "Wouldn't miss this," Jennifer said. She was a lawyer, though her specialty was family law, not HOA disputes. Still, she'd given me some advice on how to handle the situation. Her main guidance had been simple: stay calm, stick to facts, and don't let them bait me into getting emotional. At 7 o'clock sharp, the board members filed in and took their seats. Susan Kershaw sat in the center, flanked by 4 other board members. I recognized 2 of them. Gerald Penske, a retired engineer who seemed perpetually bored, and Patricia Nguyen, who ran a local real estate office. The other 2 were newer to the board. Susan banged a gavel that seemed unnecessarily theatrical and called the meeting to order. They went through standard business first: approval of last meeting's minutes, financial reports, and discussion of upcoming community landscaping. 40 minutes passed before they reached the agenda item for homeowner comments. "We have 1 resident signed up to speak tonight," Susan announced, looking directly at me. "Ryan Danvers, regarding the window modification violation at 4156 Desert Willow Drive. Mr. Danvers, you have 3 minutes. Please state your name and address for the record." I walked up to the front, connecting my laptop to the projector they had set up. "Thank you. I'm Ryan Danvers, 4156 Desert Willow Drive. I'm here to address the violation notice I received regarding window insulation." I pulled up my first slide, which showed the original plastic film on my windows from a street view. In December, I installed plastic window insulation film on my single-pane windows to reduce heating costs. This film was installed entirely on the interior of my windows. My electric bill dropped by about 40%, from $300 to $180 per month. Next slide. The violation notice. I received this notice stating the plastic created an unsightly appearance violating Section 4.2 of Community Guidelines. I investigated the concern and found that while the plastic provided excellent insulation, it did have some minor wrinkling visible from certain angles. Third slide. Photos of my current windows from multiple angles. I've now replaced the plastic film with museum-grade UV protective film, professionally installed by a licensed company. As you can see, this film is completely invisible from any exterior vantage point while still providing energy efficiency benefits and protecting my interior furnishings from sun damage. I switched to a slide showing the relevant HOA guideline sections I'd highlighted. Section 4.2 addresses exterior modifications requiring approval. However, window film applied to the interior surface of windows is not an exterior modification. Section 2.3 specifically allows interior design choices that don't materially alter the exterior appearance. The current film is invisible from outside and therefore has zero impact on neighborhood aesthetics. Final slide. The invoice from Arizona Solar Solutions. This professional installation cost me $1,300 to address a complaint about a $48 temporary solution to high energy bills. I'm in full compliance with all community guidelines and request this violation be dismissed. I stepped back from the podium. My phone timer showed 2 minutes and 45 seconds. Perfect. Susan's expression had remained neutral throughout, but I caught Gerald Penske trying to suppress a smile. Patricia Nguyen was examining the photos I'd projected with genuine interest. "Thank you, Mr. Danvers," Susan said coolly. "The board will take your comments under advisement. We'll discuss this in executive session and issue a written determination within 10 business days." "Actually," Gerald spoke up, "I'd like to motion that we discuss this now in open session. The homeowner has made his case." "Seems straightforward to me," Susan's jaw tightened. Gerald, executive session is the appropriate venue for I second the motion, Patricia interrupted. Let's just address it now. Mr. Danvers took the time to come here and present a solution. The film is invisible. What's the issue? One of the newer board members, a younger guy whose nameplate read David Foster, nodded. I agree. Looking at these photos, I can't see any film at all. If the goal is maintaining neighborhood appearance, this achieves that. Susan was clearly outnumbered, but she tried to maintain control. The principle of the matter is that modifications visible from outside, regardless of their placement, fall under our purview. We have to maintain standards. Susan, Patricia said, her tone professional but firm, he's complying with the standards. Look at the photos. There's nothing to see. And technically, he's right about Section 2.3. Interior modifications are allowed. Furthermore, Gerald added, leaning forward, we're a homeowners association in Arizona. Energy efficiency should be encouraged, not penalized. It's 115 degrees here in summer. If this man found a way to reduce his bills while maintaining appearance, that's a win for everyone. Marcus caught my eye from the audience and gave a subtle thumbs up. Susan shuffled papers in front of her, clearly trying to think of a counterargument. The original violation was issued in good faith based on the visible plastic film, which he's remedied, David Foster said. Right. That's the whole point of his presentation. He fixed what you found objectionable. The fourth board member, an older woman whose nameplate read Elena Martinez, finally spoke up. She'd been quiet the entire meeting. I drove by Mr. Danvers' house this afternoon after reviewing the agenda. I specifically looked at his windows. I saw nothing unusual, nothing that stood out. Nothing that affected the neighborhood's appearance. I move we dismiss the violation. Second, Gerald said immediately. Susan looked like she'd swallowed something sour. All in favor. 4 hands went up. Gerald, Patricia, David, and Elena. Susan's hand remained down. Motion carries, Patricia said, making a note. Violation dismissed. I exhaled a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Thank you. As I gathered my laptop and papers, Susan's voice cut through the room. Mr. Danvers, while this particular issue is resolved, please be aware that any future modifications will be scrutinized carefully. We take community standards very seriously. Jennifer, Marcus's lawyer wife, stood up from the audience. Excuse me, but is that a threat? Because that sounds like targeted harassment, which is explicitly prohibited under Arizona HOA law. Susan's face flushed. It's not a threat. It's a reminder of policy that applies to all homeowners. Good, Jennifer said pleasantly. Just wanted to clarify for the record. The meeting adjourned shortly after, and several residents came up to me as we filed out. Good for you, an elderly man said, shaking my hand. Someone needs to stand up to the tyranny around here. Susan tried to find me last year because my garage door was open while I was actively unloading groceries. Another woman said, she's out of control. Marcus, Jennifer, and I stood in the parking lot afterward, the desert night cool around us. That went better than expected, I said. Jennifer nodded. You did everything right. Came prepared, stayed calm, had documentation. The board had no choice but to side with you, especially since you actually did address the aesthetic concern. Think Susan will let it go? Jennifer and Marcus exchanged glances. Probably not, Jennifer admitted. People like her don't like losing. Just keep your documentation organized and stay aware of any other complaints. If she starts targeting you specifically, that's when it becomes harassment and you have legal recourse. Over the next few weeks, I kept expecting another violation notice to appear. Every time I checked my mailbox, I half anticipated seeing that certified letter envelope. But nothing came. My windows continued working great, the museum-grade film doing its job invisibly. My electric bills stayed low. Then March arrived, bringing with it the first real heat of the approaching Arizona summer. Temperatures started climbing into the 90s during the day. That's when I noticed something interesting. The UV protective film wasn't just helping with insulation. It was keeping my house noticeably cooler during the day. The sun wasn't heating up my furniture and floors the way it used to. My cooling costs in March were 30% lower than the previous year. I did the math and realized the museum-grade film would pay for itself in about 18 months just through energy savings. Marcus installed the same film after seeing my results. So did the elderly man who'd congratulated me at the board meeting. Arizona Solar Solutions told me they'd gotten 5 more calls from Pinewood Meadows residents asking about the invisible museum-grade film. Susan must have been fuming. Her signature crusade had backfired, resulting in more people installing window treatments that saved energy and made their homes more comfortable while being completely invisible to her aesthetic police work. But Susan Kershaw was not the type to give up easily. In early April, I received a new notice from the HOA. This one wasn't about my windows. Notice of violation. Mailbox does not meet community standards. The mailbox post at 4156 Desert Willow Drive shows signs of weathering and fading. Section 5.7 requires all mailboxes to maintain a uniform appearance consistent with community aesthetics. Please repaint or replace mailbox post within 14 days or face daily fines of $50. I walked outside and stared at my mailbox. It was slightly faded, sure. It had been sitting in the Arizona sun for years, but it looked essentially identical to every other mailbox on my street. I walked down the block, examining mailboxes. Half of them showed similar weathering. Some looked worse than mine. I took photos of 12 different mailboxes in my immediate area, all showing various degrees of fading and wear. Then I drove through the neighborhood, documenting dozens more. The selective enforcement was obvious. This time, I didn't wait for the next board meeting. I compiled my photos, drafted a formal response letter citing the HOA's own rules about selective enforcement, and sent it both via certified mail and email to Desert Communities Management and all board members. My letter was clear. Section 1.4 of the Community Guidelines prohibits selective enforcement of rules. I have documented numerous mailboxes throughout Pinewood Meadows showing similar or greater weathering than mine. Unless the HOA plans to cite all affected properties simultaneously, this violation notice constitutes targeted harassment, which is prohibited under Arizona Revised Statutes Section 33-1808. Jennifer had helped me with the legal citations. We were building a paper trail. 2 days later, I got a call from Patricia Nguyen, the board member who'd supported me in the meeting. "Mr. Danvers, this is Patricia from the HOA board. Do you have a few minutes to talk?" "Sure." "I want to apologize. The mailbox violation was issued without full board approval. Susan submitted it directly to the management company using her president authority. When your response came through and went to all board members, several of us were surprised. We weren't aware she was pursuing this. So this is personal." Patricia hesitated. "I can't speak to motivations, but I can tell you that I've called an emergency board meeting for tomorrow evening. The board needs to discuss enforcement procedures and presidential authority. Your violation is being dismissed. You'll receive formal notice by end of week." "I appreciate that." "Mr. Danvers, between you and me, document everything. If Susan continues this pattern, the board may need to consider removing her from the presidency." but that requires documentation of harassment, which is a high bar. Your photos and the pattern you're establishing could be important if it continues. The emergency board meeting happened, but it was closed to homeowners. Marcus, who had connections with several board members through his work in the homeowner insurance industry, heard through the grapevine that it got heated. Gerald Penske had apparently called Susan out directly for abuse of authority. The board voted to require all future violation notices to be approved by at least 2 board members before being issued. Susan's power was being checked, and she didn't like it. The next violation came in May, this time for my trash cans. Apparently, they were visible from the street for approximately 4 hours after trash pickup, before I got home from work to bring them in. Section 6.3 required trash cans to be stored out of sight except during pickup days. I wrote another detailed response pointing out that the trash company picked up at different times throughout the neighborhood, and that enforcing a rule about how quickly homeowners retrieved cans was impractical for people who worked during the day. I included timestamps showing my cans were collected at 11 a.m. and I returned home at 3:30 p.m. A 4-hour window was entirely reasonable. This violation was also dismissed, but the pattern was clear. Susan was throwing everything at me, hoping something would stick or that I'd eventually just comply out of exhaustion. In June, I got cited for having a garden hose visible on the side of my house. In July, it was that my grass was allegedly a 1/4 inch too tall, despite being measured immediately after my regular landscaping service had cut it. Each time, I responded with documentation, photos, and citations of relevant rules and laws. Each time, the violation was dismissed. By August, other homeowners were starting to get fed up with Susan's reign. A petition started circulating to call for a special election to recall the board president. I didn't start the petition, but I signed it. So did Marcus and Jennifer. So did 43 other households. The petition required 35 signatures to trigger a recall vote. We had more than enough. The recall election was scheduled for mid-September, requiring 60 days' notice under HOA bylaws. During that time, Susan became even more aggressive, issuing violation notices to multiple homeowners who'd signed the petition. She was burning bridges and making enemies, but she was also entrenching herself in a bunker mentality. Then things took a darker turn. In early September, I came home from work to find my front door slightly ajar. My stomach dropped. I was certain I'd locked it that morning. I pushed the door open carefully, calling out, "Hello, anyone here?" Silence. I stepped inside, looking around. Nothing seemed obviously disturbed. My TV was still on the wall. My laptop was on the kitchen counter where I'd left it. But something felt wrong. I walked through the house, checking each room. When I got to my home office, I found it. My filing cabinet, where I kept all my HOA correspondence, photos, documentation, everything related to the ongoing dispute, had been forced open. The lock was broken and the drawer hung open. Papers were slightly disheveled, like someone had rifled through them quickly. My blood went cold. I backed out of the room and called the police. The Gilbert Police Department sent an officer within 20 minutes. Officer Rodriguez was in his early 30s, professional and thorough. He took my statement, examined the filing cabinet, and checked the rest of the house. "Anything missing?" he asked. "Not that I can tell. My electronics are all here. There's cash in my bedroom that wasn't touched. It seems like they only went through this filing cabinet." "What do you keep in here?" "HOA documents. I've been in a dispute with my homeowners association for months. I've been documenting everything." Officer Rodriguez's expression shifted to something between sympathy and recognition. Let me guess, Pinewood Meadows, Susan Kershaw. You know about her. We've had a few calls from your neighborhood. Nothing quite like this, but lots of neighbor disputes that start with HOA complaints. Did you have any evidence of who might have done this? Security cameras. No cameras. But the only people who'd be interested in these specific documents would be related to the HOA dispute. That's a theory, but we need evidence. I'll file a report for breaking and entering. Check if any documents are actually missing. If they are, that could suggest targeted theft rather than random burglary. I'll also make a note about the HOA dispute for context. After Officer Rodriguez left, I spent 2 hours going through every document in my office. Nothing was missing that I could identify, but several folders were out of order. Someone had definitely searched through them. I called Jennifer, who came over immediately. She examined the filing cabinet and the police report. "This is serious," she said. "If someone from the HOA broke in looking for your documentation, that's multiple felonies, but proving it will be hard. Who else would care about HOA paperwork?" You'd be surprised what people do in these disputes. I've seen neighbors slash tires over parking spots, but let's think about this logically. Who has the most to lose if your documentation becomes part of a formal harassment case? Susan. Right, but we can't accuse without evidence. What you can do is make copies of everything, store originals off-site, and install security cameras. If someone tries again, you'll catch them. I took her advice. That weekend, I installed a comprehensive home security system with cameras covering all entry points. I also rented a safe deposit box at my bank and stored copies of all my HOA documentation there. The recall election happened on September 15th. Out of 137 eligible voting households in Pinewood Meadows, 93 cast ballots. The vote was 71-22 in favor of recalling Susan Kershaw as HOA president. Susan contested the results, claiming procedural irregularities, but the management company certified the vote. A new election for president would be held in October. During this transition period, Susan technically remained president, but with limited authority. The board had essentially neutered her ability to issue violations or make unilateral decisions. That's when my security cameras caught something interesting. On September 28th at 2:15 in the afternoon while I was at work, a white Lexus SUV pulled into my driveway. Susan Kershaw got out, looked around quickly, and walked up to my front door. She tried the handle, found it locked, and then did something that made my jaw drop when I reviewed the footage later. She pulled out a key, not just any key. She tried to insert it into my lock. It didn't work because I'd changed my locks after the break-in, but the implication was staggering. Susan had a key that she thought would open my front door. I watched the footage 3 times, making sure I was seeing what I thought I was seeing. Susan tried the key twice, looked frustrated when it didn't work, peered through my front window, and then got back in her Lexus and left. I called Officer Rodriguez immediately. I need to file an additional report related to the break-in from 3 weeks ago. I have video evidence of someone attempting to enter my home with a key. He came by that evening. I showed him the footage on my laptop. His expression darkened as he watched. That's Susan Kershaw, the HOA president you mentioned, former president as of last week. But yes. And she's attempting to use a key to enter your home without permission or any emergency justification. That's what it looks like. Did you ever give her a key, any service agreement or maintenance access? Never. I've never given the HOA or anyone associated with it a key to my house. Officer Rodriguez made notes. Here's what we have. This footage shows attempted unauthorized entry. Combined with the previous break-in where only HOA documents were targeted, we have enough for reasonable suspicion. I'm going to need to speak with Miss Kershaw. Do you know how many houses she might have keys to? The implications were sinking in. I have no idea. But if she has a key to my house that I never gave her, how did she get it? That's one of my questions for her. 2 days later, I got a call from Officer Rodriguez asking me to come to the Gilbert Police Department. When I arrived, he led me to a conference room where a detective was waiting. Detective Sarah Morrison introduced herself and gestured for me to sit. "Mr. Danvers, thank you for coming in. We've been investigating the situation with Susan Kershaw and your HOA. I need to ask you some questions and share some information we've uncovered." "Okay." "When you bought your house 3 years ago, did the previous owner give you all copies of the house keys?" "Yes, 2 sets. Front door, back door, and garage." "Why?" "Did you know that homebuilders in your subdivision were required to provide a master key to the HOA for emergency access?" My stomach sank. "No, that wasn't disclosed to me. It's buried in the original CC and Articus from when the subdivision was built 12 years ago. The stated purpose was emergency access for fire, flood, or other urgent situations. These master keys were supposed to be kept in a secure lockbox at the management company office, accessible only with proper documentation and witness signatures." "Let me guess. Susan had the keys." Detective Morrison nodded. "When we questioned Miss Kershaw about the video footage, she admitted to having keys to multiple properties. She claimed she was checking on your property for code violations and was going to leave a notice. However, we obtained a warrant for the management company's key lockbox. 17 keys were missing from the box, with no sign-out documentation. Susan's fingerprints were the only ones on the empty key slots. 17. She has keys to 17 houses. Had. We've recovered them from her residence, but here's where it gets more serious. When we executed the search warrant, we found documents from your home. The air seemed to freeze. What documents? Copies of your HOA violation responses, your documentation of other mailboxes in the neighborhood, and your photos from the board meeting presentation. These documents were in Miss Kershaw's home office in a folder labeled with your address. So she did break in. She broke into my house. That's our assessment. We also found documents from 3 other properties. We're in the process of contacting those homeowners now. Miss Kershaw has been arrested and charged with 17 counts of possession of stolen property, 4 counts of burglary, and multiple counts of trespassing and criminal invasion of privacy. I sat back, trying to process this. I just wanted to insulate my windows. Detective Morrison almost smiled. "I know, but you stood up to her, and that threatened her control. People in power sometimes do irrational things when that power is challenged. Your documentation and persistence are the reason we were able to build this case. Most homeowners just comply or move away. What happens now?" "There'll be a preliminary hearing in about 2 weeks. You'll likely be called as a witness. The other victims will also testify. Given the number of charges and the fact that she broke into multiple homes, the county attorney is taking this very seriously." Over the next few weeks, the story exploded in the local news. "HOA president arrested for breaking into homes" was the headline in the Arizona Republic. Local TV news ran segments about HOA overreach and the importance of homeowner rights. I did one interview with Channel 12 News, explaining the whole saga from the window insulation to the break-in. The publicity brought out other Pinewood Meadows residents with their own Susan Kershaw horror stories. One elderly woman had been fined repeatedly for having the wrong shade of beige on her house trim, despite using the exact paint color specified in the guidelines. Another family had been cited for their children's toys being visible in the backyard, even though the backyard wasn't visible from any street. The new HOA board, elected in October, immediately began reforms. Gerald Penske became president, and his first action was to hire a new management company. Desert Communities Management, which had enabled Susan's behavior through negligence, was terminated. The new management company was tasked with complete transparency and required board approval for any violation notices. The preliminary hearing in November was packed. I testified about the window insulation dispute, the subsequent targeting, and discovering the break-in. The other victims also testified. One woman broke down crying, describing how violated she felt knowing Susan had been in her home without permission. Susan's lawyer argued that she believed she had legitimate authority to enter properties for HOA business. But the prosecutor demolished that argument by presenting the HOA bylaws, which specifically stated that emergency access keys could only be used for genuine emergencies like fire, flood, or imminent property damage, and required written notification to homeowners within 24 hours of any entry. Susan had never filed any emergency access notifications. She'd used the keys for personal vendettas and intimidation. The judge bound her over for trial on all counts. Her bail was set at $50,000, which she posted, but she was ordered to have no contact with any Pinewood Meadows residents. The trial was scheduled for February. In the meantime, life slowly returned to normal. My museum-grade window film continued working perfectly, saving me hundreds of dollars in cooling costs through the brutal Arizona summer. Other neighborhoods in Gilbert had started asking questions about their own HOA master keys, and several associations were changing their policies. Marcus and Jennifer had me over for dinner in December. We sat on their back patio in the perfect 70-degree evening, and Marcus raised his beer. To Ryan, who accidentally became a civil rights hero by trying to save money on his electric bill, I laughed. I really just wanted to stay warm in January. You did more than that, Jennifer said. You documented everything, stood your ground, and exposed a serious abuse of power. Susan Kershaw could have continued violating people's privacy and rights for years if you hadn't fought back. It cost me $1,300 for window film, which you've probably made back by now in energy savings, Marcus pointed out. He was right. I'd done the calculation recently. Between heating and cooling savings, the museum-grade film had already saved me about $800. I'd break even by early spring. The trial in February lasted 4 days. I testified again, along with the other victims. The prosecutor presented the stolen documents found in Susan's house, the master keys, the security footage of her attempting to enter my home, and testimony from the management company about the missing keys. Susan's defense argued that she'd been under stress, that HOA leadership had been overwhelming, and that she'd made poor judgment calls but had no criminal intent. The jury didn't buy it. On February 28th, Susan Kershaw was convicted on 4 counts of burglary in the second degree, 17 counts of possession of stolen property, and 8 counts of criminal trespass. She was acquitted on some of the lesser charges, but the major felonies stuck. Sentencing happened in March. The judge was thorough in his remarks. Miss Kershaw, you held a position of trust in your community. Homeowners associations exist to maintain property values and quality of life, not to enable personal vendettas or abuse of power. You violated the sanctity of people's homes, their privacy, and their trust. These were not crimes of passion or necessity. They were calculated acts of intimidation against people who dared to disagree with you. The court sentences you to 4 years in state prison, with eligibility for parole after 2 years, followed by 3 years of probation. Susan remained stone-faced through the sentencing. Her lawyer filed an appeal, but legal experts I spoke with said the conviction would likely stand. The civil lawsuits followed. All 4 homeowners whose houses she'd broken into filed suits against both Susan personally and the HOA for negligence in allowing her access to master keys. I settled with the HOA's insurance company for $15,000, which more than covered my security system, new locks and legal fees, with some left over. The Pinewood Meadows HOA itself underwent major changes. Gerald Penske led the board in rewriting large sections of the community guidelines, emphasizing reasonable enforcement and energy efficiency. A new provision explicitly allowed interior window treatments of any kind as long as they didn't violate local building codes. The master key policy was abolished entirely. All master keys were destroyed in a ceremony at a board meeting, attended by over 50 homeowners. The HOA still maintained a list of homeowners who voluntarily chose to provide keys for emergency access, but it was purely optional, and the keys were held by the fire department, not the HOA. By summer, the neighborhood had settled into a new normal. People actually talked to each other at the community pool instead of worrying about violating some obscure rule. Kids played in front yards without parents stressing about toys being visible. Mailboxes faded naturally without anyone caring. I continued working with Arizona Solar Solutions, who'd given me a referral fee for all the business that came from my situation. They'd installed museum-grade film on 23 more houses in Pinewood Meadows and had started marketing it as HOA-proof window film in their advertising. On a Saturday afternoon in June, I was washing my car in the driveway when a young couple walked up. They looked to be in their late 20s, carrying a baby. "Are you Ryan Danvers?" the man asked. "I am. We're looking at the house for sale 2 streets over. The realtor mentioned your name." Something about window film and the HOA. I smiled and gave them the short version of the story. Their eyes widened as I explained. "So the HOA is okay now?" the woman asked, bouncing the baby gently. "Much better. New board, new policies, new management company." But honestly, the lesson isn't really about this specific HOA. It's about knowing your rights, documenting everything, and not backing down when you're right. "That's good advice," the man said. "We'll probably still look at houses outside HOA neighborhoods, though." I laughed. "I don't blame you. But if you do buy here, come talk to me about window film. It'll save you a fortune on AC bills with a baby in the house." They thanked me and walked on. I went back to washing my car, the afternoon sun warm but not oppressive, thanks partly to the film on my windows reducing the heat buildup in my house. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "BBQ tomorrow. Gerald is coming, wants to thank you personally for helping turn the neighborhood around." I texted back confirmation. Gerald had told me privately that my stand against Susan had given other board members the courage to challenge her behavior. Without the documentation I'd built, the board might have continued enabling her indefinitely. That evening, I sat on my back patio with a cold drink, looking at my house. The windows reflected the sunset, clear and perfect. You still couldn't tell there was any film on them unless you knew to look for it. Inside, my energy bills were low, my house was comfortable, and I had peace of mind from the security system and new locks. What had started as a simple attempt to save money on heating bills had turned into an 8-month battle that had exposed corruption, led to criminal convictions, and reformed an entire neighborhood's governance. It seemed absurd when I thought about it that way. but it also felt right. Sometimes standing up for yourself over something small leads to fixing something much bigger. Sometimes the cost of doing the right thing is steep, at least initially, but pays dividends you never expected. And sometimes the best revenge against petty tyranny is simply refusing to be tyrannized while documenting everything along the way. I raised my glass to my museum-grade window film, the most expensive $48 problem I'd ever solved, and took a long drink as the Arizona evening settled into comfortable warmth around me. The next morning, I woke up to an email from a producer at a national news network. They wanted to do a segment about HOA reform and thought my story would be a good centerpiece. I was initially hesitant. The local news coverage had been fine, but national attention seemed like overkill. Then I thought about all the other homeowners across the country dealing with similar situations. Maybe sharing the story more widely could help others understand their rights and encourage them to stand up to HOA overreach. I agreed to the interview. The segment aired 3 weeks later on a morning news show. They framed it as a consumer protection story about HOA power and homeowner rights. The producers had done their homework, interviewing legal experts about HOA law, other homeowners with horror stories, and reform advocates pushing for better regulations. My part was about 10 minutes of the 30-minute segment. I explained the whole situation calmly and factually, emphasizing the documentation aspect and the importance of knowing the actual rules rather than just accepting whatever the HOA claimed. The response was overwhelming. My email inbox filled with messages from people across the country dealing with their own HOA disputes. Some wanted advice, others just wanted to share their stories. A few legal firms specializing in HOA law reached out, asking if I'd be willing to consult on cases where documentation and persistence had been key factors. I wasn't looking to become an HOA crusader. I had a full-time job as an IT systems analyst that had nothing to do with property law. But I created a simple website laying out the lessons I'd learned. Document everything. Know your actual rights under the law. Don't confuse HOA guidelines with actual legal requirements, and understand when selective enforcement crosses into harassment. The website cost me $12 a year for hosting and took a weekend to set up. It received over 30,000 visits in the first month. People were hungry for practical information about dealing with overzealous HOAs. Meanwhile, Susan's appeal was denied in August. She reported to the Arizona State Prison Complex in Perryville in September to begin serving her sentence. I felt no particular satisfaction about it. I'd never wanted anyone to go to prison. I just wanted to insulate my windows and be left alone. But her actions had consequences, and those consequences were entirely of her own making. The civil suit money I'd received went into savings. I considered it an emergency fund for any future property issues, though I hoped there wouldn't be any. The new HOA board had been excellent, focused on actual property maintenance and community building rather than petty enforcement. In October, Gerald organized a neighborhood block party, the first one in years. Over 100 residents showed up. Kids played in the street, which was blocked off with permission from the city. People brought food and drinks. Someone set up a volleyball net. I was manning a grill, cooking burgers and hot dogs when Alina Martinez, one of the board members who'd supported me from the beginning, came over. "You know what's nice about today," she said. "Besides the perfect weather, people aren't afraid anymore. For years, neighborhood gatherings were rare because Susan would find reasons to cite people for noise or parking or something. People just stopped trying. Now look at this." She gestured at the crowd. Neighbors who'd barely spoken to each other were laughing together. The community pool in the distance was full of kids. The whole neighborhood felt alive in a way I hadn't experienced before. "I'm glad things changed," I said, flipping a burger. "You made it possible. You could have just taken down the plastic film and moved on. Instead, you fought back properly, and it exposed everything." "I just didn't want to pay $50 a day in fines." Alina laughed. "Whatever your motivation, we're all better off for it." As fall turned to winter, my first heating bills of the season came in. Thanks to the museum-grade film, my costs remained low even when December nights dropped into the 30s. The film had now fully paid for itself and would continue saving money for years to come. In late November, I got a letter from the Arizona Attorney General's office. They were conducting a statewide review of HOA practices and wanted to interview me about my experiences. Apparently, the publicity around Susan's case had prompted legislative interest in HOA reform. I spent 2 hours on the phone with an assistant attorney general, walking through everything that had happened. She asked detailed questions about the master key issue, selective enforcement, and the lack of oversight that had enabled Susan's behavior. "Your case has become something of a template," she told me. "We're seeing common patterns across the state. HOA boards with too much power, management companies that don't provide proper oversight, and homeowners who don't know their legal rights. The legislature is considering new laws that would require better transparency and limit HOA authority in specific areas." "That sounds good. It's partly because you made your case public and documented everything so thoroughly. Most HOA disputes are messy, with poor documentation and emotional escalation. Yours was clean, factual, and clearly showed the abuse of power. That makes it useful for policy discussions." In January, I was invited to testify before a state legislative committee considering HOA reform bills. I took a day off work and drove to Phoenix, where I spent 15 minutes describing my experience to a room full of legislators and lobbyists. The HOA industry lobbyists tried to paint my case as an outlier, an extreme example that wasn't representative of typical HOA operations. But other homeowners testified with similar stories, and the pattern was clear. The reform bills passed in March. New Arizona law now required HOA boards to maintain detailed records of all enforcement actions, prohibited selective enforcement without documented justification, mandated that any emergency access keys be held by municipal authorities rather than HOAs, and created a state ombudsman office to investigate homeowner complaints about HOA abuse. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. By the time my 1-year anniversary of the whole situation rolled around in January of the following year, life had settled into comfortable normalcy. I'd replaced my HVAC system with a more efficient model, which combined with the window film meant my energy costs were about half what they'd been 2 years earlier. The house itself felt different too. It had gone from being just a place I lived to being genuinely mine, a space I'd defended and improved. The museum-grade film on the windows was a daily reminder that standing up for yourself, even in small things, could lead to meaningful change. Marcus and Jennifer invited me over for dinner on the anniversary of my first board meeting appearance. We sat around their dining room table, reminiscing about the whole saga. "Remember when you showed up with that PowerPoint presentation?" Marcus said, laughing. "Susan's face was priceless." "I was so nervous, I must have practiced that 3-minute speech 20 times. It worked, though," Jennifer said. "You were prepared, calm, and factual. That's how you win these things. Emotion and anger just play into their hands. I almost got angry plenty of times, but you didn't. That's what mattered." We talked late into the evening, and as I drove home under the clear January sky, I reflected on how a simple home improvement project had spiraled into something so much larger. I'd never set out to be an HOA reform advocate or to expose corruption. I just wanted to stay warm and save money on my electric bill. But sometimes life pushes you into situations where you have to choose between backing down or standing firm. I'd chosen to stand firm, not because I was particularly brave or principled, but because backing down felt wrong. The cost had been time, stress, and $1,300 for window film. The benefit had been justice, systemic change, and a neighborhood transformed. Was it worth it? Absolutely. Would I do it again? Probably not by choice, but if forced into a similar situation, I'd handle it the same way. Document everything, know the rules, stay calm, and don't back down when you're right. I pulled into my driveway and looked at my house. The front windows reflected the street lights, perfectly clear and invisible. Inside, the house was comfortable and warm, protected by more than just film. It was protected by the knowledge that I'd stood up for my rights and won, and that was worth more than any energy savings could ever be.